Will I start? Okay, so I'm gonna turn on my video. Okay, so hopefully people on Zoom should be able to see and hear me, and obviously you guys can see and hear me as well. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Elinor O'Donovan. I'm an artist from Ireland, and I've been a resident at RU for the last 3 weeks. While I've been here, I've been researching the story of my great aunt, a woman called Charlotte Grace O'Brien, and thinking about the migration of Irish women from Ireland to America in the decades following the famine in Ireland, so sort of mid to late 1800s. I called the title of this talk An Ecology of Memory because ecology and memory are both things that I kind of look at in my practice, but also because I think that the idea of memories and stories and identities kind of interact with each other, kind of like an ecosystem or a system of ecology where they kind of shape each other, and it's a sort of a living, active system. Because this is very much an artist talk rooted in uncertainty, we might find that today I go off on tangents or sort of twirling, spiraling tendrils of thought, and they kind of end up in weird places, or we're not really sure what the point is. That's good, I think. Because this is also an artist talk rooted in uncertainty, basically I want to kind of sidestep the idea of this kind of maybe a scientific method or a rational method of me being the expert up here speaking to you didactically. And actually maybe we can open ourselves up to kind of sort of a blurriness or a nuance that comes with going outside of those kind of rational methods, including the kind of lecture format where I'm the expert and I'm talking at you. I'm very much not an expert. I'm an artist. I'm an unreliable narrator. And so this talk is very much about me trying to look at this ecology of memory while I'm very much situated in the same sort of problematic of looking at things, trying to look at the things that I am in. So that's just to kind of speak to this idea of what I'm doing. So I'm very interested in uncertainty in my practice. It kind of comes into my work in lots of ways. And because this research that I'm doing about my great aunt and the migration of women from Ireland to the US is sort of historical archive materials, I want to kind of make this into a film. So I thought I would maybe intro my work today by sort of showing some clips from films that I've made. I've made 2 films so far, so this would probably be the 3rd. And so then what I'll do is I'll go in and I'll show you kind of the research that I've been doing in the last 3 weeks. So the first film that I'm going to show you is called The Immeasurable Grief of the Prawn. And excuse me. Basically, this started as the result of a conversation that I had with my housemate about 2 years ago. She's a vegetarian, and I served her a curry with prawns in it. And she was very nice about it. She said, it's okay, I eat prawns sometimes. And we were kind of discussing it, and she said, oh, you know, something like, it's kind of more okay to eat prawns because they don't have brains or nervous systems, so they don't feel pain. And she's not the first vegetarian that I've heard this before. You know, people kind of sort of say that, and it got me kind of thinking, where does that come from? Why have we just kind of accepted that as the truth? So this film, I'm going to play the first 6 minutes. It's 12 minutes long, but it's kind of a meditation on this idea. Where do we get our knowledge from? What happens if our sources of knowledge are unreliable, dodgy, you know, poorly remembered? So I'll play the first 6 minutes of this, and then I'll play another film for you now as well. I've also put the subtitles on just because these people are speaking in Irish accents, and I thought maybe for the international crew in the room, it might be helpful to have subtitles on. Okay.
I'm so sorry.
No, really, it's fine.
I just completely forgot. And after that whole debacle at the dinner party.
Oh, don't be so hard on yourself. As if you were supposed to know a beef Wellington killed her mother. No, it's really not a big deal. I eat prawns sometimes. And to my knowledge, no family member has ever been killed by prawns. I mean, really, a beef Wellington.
I'll make you some spaghetti.
No, stop.
With a little butter and some peas.
You stop it, will you sit down? I eat prawns. I'm eating them. See?
Oh, God. Are you sure?
Positive. Oh, and my mother used to say that they don't have brains or a nervous system, so they don't feel pain.
Why do I feel like you're just saying this to make me feel better?
They're basically sea vegetables.
Vegetables with little faces.
Do you want me to eat this or not?
Ah, memory. The old unreliable, as I like to call it.
When have you ever said that before?
You know, I heard that squirrels lose up to 80% of the nuts they bury because they forget where they put them.
Ah, my nuts. My precious nuts.
Nat, why is your squirrel Italian-American?
Hey.
I feel like I have that problem too.
What?
You're
You
Italian-American?
lost all your nuts?
No, it's just my memory's getting really bad.
Okay, no. What about this? Oh no, my nuts. I thought I buried them here.
I think the first one was better. Sorry, Laura, you were saying something.
Oh, I just feel like my memory's gotten so bad lately. Like, my rate of retention is at like 20%.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, it means that the squirrels accidentally plant loads of trees.
Where'd you get this from, John?
A girl had it on her Tinder bio?
Ah, that makes sense.
So it's definitely
Yeah.
true.
You had us going for a minute there, like, oh yeah, very, very reputable source of information there, John. Random girl's Tinder bio.
Well, look. If you can't verify it, then you might as well just go with it. A bit like Nat's story about the prawns.
Excuse you, that was actually true.
Sorry, wait, I missed this. What's the prawn story?
You,
I
you know,
told it like 10 minutes ago. You were there. Jeez, your memory is bad. Right, children, settle down. Gather round. It was me, alone again, on a Friday night, watching a documentary about these prawns, right? And there's a specific prawn that's the loudest creature on Earth, right? So what it does is it like pops these little bubbles in its claws, right? And they make miniature sonic booms. Yeah, right? And like, if you're on land next to where like a load of these little prawns are making their noises, you can actually hear them. Wow.
That's mad. How have I never heard of this before?
because it's definitely not true.
It is true. It's like the only noise they can make because they don't have mouths.
I wonder why they do it, like, to scare away predators.
Could be a mating ritual.
Why?
No, maybe they're just trying to express themselves.
Yeah. I'd like to think that they're all doing it to a beat.
Like to the start of We Will Rock You.
What are you doing? No, John. No,
Yeah.
no, not here.
Yeah. A prawny, you're a boy, you're a big prawn trying to make some noise cause you haven't got a mouth, you got tiny claws and lots of legs. Oh, why you gotta make so much prawny noise? Oh, we will pop you.
No.
Oh, we Brian May prawn out of the water.
It was not.
Dad, look out! That could have killed us.
Okay, so I'll stop that one there. So it goes on to kind of take all of those kind of throwaway jokes a little bit more seriously. Oh, I'll just unmute. It goes on to take some of those throwaway jokes a little bit more seriously until you get to the point where there is this omniscient prawn who's grieving for all of the other prawns that have been eaten by vegetarians over a dinner table conversation. So the next film that I'm going to show you started off similarly as a kind of throwaway joke. It's called Metametamorphosis. So where in Kafka's Metamorphosis, Gregor Samsa awakes after a night of uneasy dreams to discover that he's turned into a beetle. In Metametamorphosis, he awakes after a night of uneasy dreams to discover that he's turned into the Beatles, all of them at the same time. So it's about trying to kind of think about, I guess, how we think of celebrities, what happens to someone after we die, how are we all connected in the universe at once to all things. Anyway, I'll play it and I'll stop talking about it. As Gregor Samsa awoke one morning from uneasy dreams, he found himself transformed in his bed into a gigantic beetle. Sorry, that's not right. That's better.
Gregor, is everything all right?
No! Don't come in!
To lead a better life, I need my love to be here, making each day of the year, changing my life with the wave of a hand. Nobody can deny there's something there, running my hands through her hair, each one believing how good it can be. Someone is speaking but she doesn't know he's there. I want her everywhere, and if she's beside me, I know I need never care. But to love her is to need her everywhere, knowing that love each one believing how good it can be. Someone is speaking, but she doesn't know he's there. I want her everywhere. Then if she's beside me, I know I need never care. But to love her is to need her everywhere, knowing that love's to share. Each one believing how good it can be. Someone is speaking, but she doesn't know he's there. I will be there and everywhere, here, there, and everywhere.
Knowing that each one believing how good it can be. Da 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 da. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Mm. Mm. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Mm. Mm. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to jump ahead and show you the research that I've been looking at this month, which is all sort of culminating in a project called Roisin. And it's based on the story of my great-great-great-great aunt. So this relative of mine, my great-great-great-great aunt, was a woman called Charlotte Grace O'Brien. And she was born in 1845. She died in 1909. She's known kind of for being the daughter of this man, William Smith O'Brien, who was an Irish nationalist politician, political leader who was sentenced to death for his part in a political uprising in the 1840s during the famine, but that sentence was commuted to exile and he was sent to Van Diemen's Land, as it was called, it's now Tasmania. And so she kind of had an interest in politics because of her father's nationalism. They were an Irish Protestant family, which was kind of unusual to be nationalists at the time, but they were very wealthy. They were landowners. This is her house, Carramoyle, which she would have grown up in Limerick. So they come from kind of a line of kind of sort of landowning, sort of landed gentry within Ireland. At the time, Ireland was part of Great Britain, but there was an emerging sort of home rule movement which wanted Ireland to have its own parliament in Ireland, but within the United Kingdom. There was also other people who were calling for complete Irish independence at that time. She became deaf in her 30s, interestingly. I've read a few different sources for this that said either she had a childhood illness that became full deafness later in life, or she had like a hereditary condition, and there is something that I read that said a few other members of her family also were deaf. Why I think this is interesting is because later in life, she becomes a campaigner and an advocate for these Irish emigrant women who are migrating to the United States. And she achieves a lot of work, and she does this, while being almost completely deaf, which I think for at the time, this was the 1870s, 1880s, I think is really remarkable. But before she was a campaigner, she was a poet and a writer. I found a copy of one of her books, this book Lyrics, in the New York Public Library. I found a first edition, which was really amazing. Her writing is very 1800s, it's very sort of floral and maybe a bit over the top and dramatic possibly, but it's, it was very much of its time. So how she becomes a campaigner and an advocate for these Irish women emigrating to the United States is she reads this book called The Irish in America, published by a man called John Maguire, who was an Irish politician in Cork at the time. And in the book, he's kind of talking about the experiences of people migrating from Ireland to the United States, and also the conditions of the boats that they're traveling on, and what lies for them on the other side of the Atlantic. So often they were sort of overcharged or lured into sort of crime, the women into prostitution, all of these kind of scandals at the time. And so she is really moved by this. She visits Cove, which is a town in Cork. At the time it was called Queenstown. And it leads to, in 1882, she sets up O'Brien's emigrant home in Cove. Cove, as it's now called, at the time Queenstown, was the main port from which people would migrate from Ireland to the United States. It's also famously where the Titanic had the last stop on its journey before it set out for the United States. And here it is in Ireland, just kind of in relation to the rest of Ireland. So these sort of steerage ships that would bring people from Liverpool would stop then in Queenstown and continue on to New York. So because she had read this book by John Maguire, she decides to visit Queenstown. She had friends there, and she goes on board the boats and she sees the kind of conditions that people are subjected to. So she sees that there are huge sort of steerage decks where, you know, hundreds of women, married single women, are forced to sort of share lodgings with men. Sometimes there's sort of cattle and horses and livestock kept in the sort of passenger quarters. So it's really unsafe, it's quite unsanitary. And she begins to sort of write campaign letters to politicians in Ireland and in Westminster in Britain to kind of try and campaign to improve these conditions. So as she sets up O'Brien's emigrant home, this is like a 107-bed house that, compared to the other boarding houses in Cove at the time, which were really overcharging people to stay, she charges kind of reasonable rates. Because of that, all the merchants in Cove and all the boarding houses boycott her, and she has to start bringing her goods in from Cork City, which is like a bit of a journey, I guess, at the time, even though by today's standards, Cove and Cork are quite close. That's Cove and that's Cork. So she has the emigrant home going for a few years. She'll wake up in the morning really early and go on board these steerage ships to kind of inspect them. And she has a right-hand man who's kind of there to do it with her. And things gradually do begin to improve, but not really enough. And so she realizes that for her, to make a difference, it's not just enough to try and tackle the issue on one side of the Atlantic Ocean. She has to also help people on the other side of the ocean. So she writes a letter to the bishop in New York in 1881. This letter I actually got to see, which was great, in the archives in Yonkers, in the archives of the Archdiocese of New York. And in this letter, she writes to the bishop, who I think later becomes the cardinal, and she says, look, I'm coming to New York. I'm looking for somewhere to stay where I can stay in these kind of lodgings that Irish emigrant women are staying in, so I can see what it's really like for people. And so she does. She stays in a tenement house on Washington Street when she first arrives. And then she later goes on to St. Paul, Minnesota, where she meets Bishop John Ireland, who was kind of a friend of a friend. And she encourages him to set up this sort of boarding house for Irish women in Manhattan to kind of protect them when they arrive in New York. At the time, interestingly, between sort of 1880s to 1890s, Irish women made up 52% of the people emigrating from Ireland to the United States, which was unusual compared to other immigrant groups. Usually it was men who would go over and then send money back to bring their families over. In this case, actually the majority of people, and the majority of them very young women, would be traveling alone. So to have a kind of boarding house in New York with a sort of Catholic presence, even though Charlotte O'Brien herself would have been Protestant, she realized that this would be very important for these women at the time. You know, they really trusted their priests. It was very much about being part of their community, and it would have been a safe place for them. So the Catholic Church, based on her sort of canvassing and her prompting, they set up the mission of Our Lady of the Rosary, the home for Irish immigrant girls. And it operates for 2 years in Broadway before they buy this house on 7 State Street. So as you can see, this building is still here today. It's kind of crazy. It's just across from the ferry to Governor's Island, so you might even have noticed it before. But it's flanked by these 2 huge skyscrapers, which is kind of amazing. And so I think between the 1880s and the 1950s, this home provides for about 100,000 girls, and they connect them with jobs, they connect them with family members, and it's generally just to kind of protect them from other people who might try and bring them into, scam them, or, you know, bring them into kind of more dangerous situations. The reason actually why there's sort of a lot of young Irish women emigrating is because Ireland, this is a few decades after the famine in Ireland, where there was sort of mass starvation, but people were still very, very poor. Say if you were a farming family in Ireland at the time, the eldest son in your family would inherit the farm, but no one else would inherit anything. So the other sons, they could be farm laborers, so they would often go off and work on other people's farms. But if you had daughters, you might only have enough money for the dowry for one daughter. So the other daughters would often sort of feel like a burden to their families because essentially, you know, they were another mouth to feed at the time. So women started emigrating to the United States. They found I think mostly employment in domestic services, so as sort of maids in sort of wealthy people's homes. But they would be able to send money back to their families. And so it was a way of them sort of being seen as not a burden, that they could contribute to their kind of families at home. So that's why such huge amounts of Irish women were emigrating. I mean, you can see this image here, which is a drawing of the sort of the Irish depositors of the Emigrant Savings Bank, withdrawing money to send to their suffering relatives in the old country. Like most of the people in this picture are women. So 7 State Street, I visited while I was here. I held up this photo kind of in front of it to sort of show that the building pretty much exactly from the outside looks as it did in the 1880s. The building is now stewarded by the Sisters of Life Convent. And this is, you know, when I said earlier that this talk might kind of go on threads and end up in places that are kind of unresolved, this is one of them. So they're stewarded by the Sisters of Life Convent, who from there run like a crisis pregnancy service, but that would read as like an anti-abortion, pro-life crisis pregnancy service. I visited, the nuns were extremely kind. They were all very young women as well. And when I was talking to one of them, she said that the Sisters of Life Convent was set up in the 1990s, to counter, in her words, this culture of death in America about having legal abortion. So it's a really complicated and I guess, I'm not sure where I feel uncomfortable by it. I'm not sure where I'm resolved in this. Because, you know, to the nun that I spoke to, you know, they're very much in their minds continuing a legacy of helping women in a sort of Catholic sense, as in the 1880s, women were being helped in a Catholic sense. And it's just that how this relationship between these things has changed in the last 150 years. So that's kind of one thread of this story that I'm not really sure how to resolve it. But I'm going to kind of go back to Charlotte O'Brien. So after she goes on this lecture tour in 1882 in the United States, she returns back to Ireland. And after a couple of years of campaigning, she actually retires completely, just because of her health, because of her disability, I guess. And she retires to her home in Foynes. So Foynes is a town in Limerick. It's on the Shannon estuary. I'll just zoom out so you can kind of see it in relation to the rest of Ireland. But she was, as well as being a writer and a campaigner, she was an avid botanist and a gardener. So you can see this is her house. You can kind of make out the lovely garden here. And so for the rest of her life, basically, she would contribute to botanical journals. You know, she would write about the flora of the Shannon River and the Shannon estuary. And she was very much interested in flowers and this kind of aspect. So for me, taking this research, what I want to do with it is kind of think about these kind of flower imageries. So this was in a letter that she wrote to someone. She said, "I will puzzle the botanists of another generation, and when my bones are dust and my good spade rust, and when my house is pulled down and my garden asphalt and bricks, my extra special wild briars and my daffodils will still linger on the hillside and scent the bloomy air for generations that know me not nor mine." And I love that because I've put emphasis on extra special wild briars because, as I said at the start, this project is called Roisin. And so now I've started to link these kind of flower images with the idea of women emigrating from Ireland to the United States. So Roisin, the title, it's a common Irish girl's name. In Irish, it means little rose. But it fits with this kind of image that was kind of prevailing at the time, that Irish women were, roses. They were wild Irish roses. There's even a song here that I can play a clip of, My Wild Irish Rose by Chauncey Alcott, he was Irish American. His mother was actually from Cork. But it's this metaphor of using these kind of flowers as a stand-in for women, because I guess they were seen as being quite sort of passive creatures without agency. And what's interesting actually is when I think about the Irish nationalist story and how writers at the time would kind of write about Irish nationalism, they would often use this picture of Mother Ireland, of Ireland, the nation, being a female figure. And again, similarly, not really giving this woman agency. It was more like she was something that you had to defend. She was something that you had to fight for, but she herself was a passive kind of thing. So I find this image really interesting, this idea that roses and flowers are a stand-in for women. Women are a stand-in for Ireland. I'm going to play just maybe 30 seconds of this song, My Wild Irish Rose, just because I think it's brilliant. Ooh, no, sorry. Okay, so this is kind of something that I was thinking about before I came on this residency. And what I had started thinking about was, how can I make a work that sort of feels like something that I would make? And I guess I showed you a clip from the first film that I had made. I like to kind of speculate and kind of create these sort of speculative narratives. And what I came up with is the idea that there's a fictional wildflower in 1800s Ireland that gets brought to America. The seeds or the husks or whatever get stuck on people's clothes and are brought over to America as the Irish women emigrate. This kind of fits on one level because actually the word diaspora comes from ancient Greek, meaning diasperos, to scatter seeds. So it's really this lovely fitting imagery of sort of seeds being brought over and taking root. And in this story, you fast forward to the present day, and where there's a sort of a disconnect between what I see as Ireland and then what I see as maybe an Irish American image of Irishness that's maybe perhaps driven by consumerism. I was kind of thinking of the green shamrock shakes in McDonald's, the green dyes that they use to dye the Chicago River green on St. Patrick's Day. And so I was speculating that maybe these green dyes could be made out of chlorophyll, and that in this fictional narrative, the chlorophyll causes the flower to bloom and germinate, and it takes over the city of New York, and it brings the capitalist machine to a halt. It was a great vision up until I got here, I'm afraid. And I guess something that I realized very quickly is that these apocalypse visions, these apocalypse narratives that happen in films and TV, they always neglect to mention that the people who are most harmed by the apocalypse are the people who are already living in poverty or below the poverty line. And it's, even in this image that I made of these flowers kind of taking over the city of New York in my mind, likely people living in penthouse apartments would be fine. Any kind of ecological disaster that happens and are happening around the world, it's the people who are already vulnerable are the people who are targeted by this. So this apocalypse vision didn't really work for me. Thinking about the flowers, thinking about the idea of like seeds being brought over, kind of got me thinking about this idea of nativeness and like invasive plants, invasive species. And so something that I was really thinking about while I was here was thinking about the indigenous people who are from this part of America. So the Lenape people of Mannahatta. So before New York was New York, it was New Amsterdam, the Dutch colony. And before that, and you know, in an indigenous way, it still is the Mannahatta in the Munsee language, that this is the land of the Lenape people. And so that kind of also was bringing up ideas and questions about nationalism and national identity. And it's very much part of the story as well. You know, Irish emigration from Ireland to the US, I've been thinking about this Irish identity that was still very much being developed at the time. So something that I was thinking about, I took a quote here from Elizabeth Pavanelli's essay in Efflux, Divergent Survivances. I'm going to read it out. She says, for both European and American grammars, the massive deathscapes of African and First Nations people provided the conditions of their birth and inhabit their sacred words like liberalism, demos, capitalism, freedom, friendship, neutrality, and reason. If there is a general economy of Western hauntology, it is because their social and political houses are riddled with a specific ghostly presence of the massacred bodies they cannot manage or get rid of because they are the condition of their most intimate inside. So I guess I was thinking about these Irish women migrating to the United States, entering into a country, entering into like a civilization that's very much built on displacement, dispossession, and death of Indigenous people and Black people. And that this idea of developing a state, Ireland as a republic, in our constitution, we also use those words like democracy and friendship and freedom, because Ireland as a republic has really been like, there's been many steps to Irish independence as a state. In the 20s and 30s, we were the Irish Free State, and then we became the Republic of Ireland. But Eamon de Valera, who was one of the first leaders of the Irish state and who mostly wrote the Constitution, he would have been borrowing these words that were used in America, that were used in France, in sort of creating republics. And so this, you know, what Pavanelli here calls the grammars, she's referencing, I think, this essay by Horton Spillers, with Mama's Baby, Papa's Maybe, which is talking about the way that America was built on the transatlantic slave trade. And so that's something that's coming up for me as well, because how can you talk about women crossing the Atlantic Ocean without also thinking about the many African women who were forcibly taken from their homes and brought across the Atlantic Ocean, and many of whom were killed? Again, this is a thread that I don't really know how to resolve, but I think it's for me, it's making this idea that this apocalypse narrative that I have been thinking of has been insufficient. Another thing, I'm just going to go back to the idea of the flowers. While I was here, I was trying to figure out what flower, you know, Charlotte Grace O'Brien was talking about. She referenced extra special wild briars. At first, I thought it was maybe this Rosa rubiginosa, a sweetbriar rose, which grows in Ireland. Then I also thought maybe it was dog roses or wild roses, because they're referred to as wild roses as well. But actually, I think I have it figured out now. I went to the Brooklyn Botanic Gardens, and they have a rose garden. And there I noticed there is a species of rose called hibernica. And this stood out to me because the Latin word for Ireland is hibernia. And so this species of rose, for me, is an Irish rose. So when I was looking into it, I discovered, yes, it's this Rosa hibernica. And then when I was reading about Charlotte Grace O'Brien's botany, they mentioned this Rosa hibernica in the area of Limerick where she lives, and it grows. And I found on this botany distribution map, there's a little cluster of this particular kind of rose in the exact place in Limerick where she had lived. So I think likely the extra special wild briars that she's talking about when she's thinking about her legacy is Rosa hibernica, this Irish rose. And so it's just this like perfect fit in terms of thinking about this Irish national identity, these flowers, these plants that are sort of infiltrating the United States. And the fact that it's in the Brooklyn Botanic Gardens, it says here is introduced in 1795, so maybe 100 years before the period that I'm talking about. But it shows that it was brought over somehow, either on purpose or accidentally, that these were brought over to the United States. And actually these flowers aren't native to the US. They can be invasive in some parts of California and around the US. But I thought that was just like an amazing coincidence. And actually the whole time I've been doing this project, there's been loads of looping kind of circular coincidences. So I guess I want to go back to the sort of speculative narrative that I was thinking about. And I realized again that this apocalypse vision is insufficient. At the start of the month, while I was here in New York, I went to a lecture by Silvia Federici, who is like a feminist Marxist scholar. And, you know, she was talking about the war in Gaza. She was talking about this industrial capitalist war machine. And someone asked her, she was like, well, what do we do? And so Silvia Federici's response, you know, it's a response that I've heard before in terms of that question, but she suggests that we have to start thinking collectively. And then this idea of thinking collectively, how you would visualize this, I think fits with this kind of organic material that I'm thinking of, these kind of root structures, these kind of networks of relations. This way of thinking collectivity is an organic thing. And so for me, that is how you counter the capitalist machine, not with this kind of ecological event and a vision of the apocalypse, but actually thinking with nature, thinking like nature to kind of organize ourselves in these kind of interrelated structures. And just, I guess, the last thing, when I was thinking about how do we infiltrate? How do we go between these kind of things that already exist? What stood out to me in the pamphlets and the essays that I was reading from the sort of 1880s, 1890s is how much people would put these sort of floral imagery in between the spaces of text, and they were everywhere. Like they were in ads for the liner, the ships to go across the Atlantic. They had all of these little sort of floral motifs. And I think that's a really nice way of thinking about how actually these things have already been growing within the mechanics of culture already. It's something that I'd really like to kind of explore more, these kind of floral images. But yeah, that's kind of the idea that I have at the moment. It's kind of a lot of looping, interrelated, interconnected things, and like way more questions than answers that I have at the moment. But yeah, that's it. Thanks. I don't know if we have time for like questions or, yeah. There's some things that I left out as well, so I'd be interested to. I can talk a bit more. Something that I left out was, so just to illustrate the connection between me and this person, you know, so she is the sister of my great-great-great-grandfather. But something that's, I guess, been troubling me about this connection between me and her is that, you know, if you have one great-great-great-great-grandparent, you also have 63 other great-great-great-great-great-grandparents. So I guess for me, I've been interested in, you know, thinking about like, well, it's this kind of patrilineage, you know, we're thinking in terms of the eldest son of the eldest son of the eldest son going through the father's line. But there's loads of other branches, like a sort of, like a rhizome, you know, from all the different other relatives that we have. And something as well that I haven't really thought about, I guess, as much while I've been here, on the idea of women migrating, I haven't really thought about women who today migrate to Ireland. That Ireland is also a place where people migrate to. So a connection that I found, so Charlotte's brother Edward. His first wife was a woman called Mary Springrice. The Springrice, also this kind of landed gentry family. Her father was Lord Monteagle or something like that. And they lived in Mount Trenchard House, which is in Limerick. It's actually really close to, so that little blue flag is where Charlotte Grace O'Brien's house was in Foynes. And then Mount Trenchard House was here, but it's now like an accommodation centre for like asylum seekers in Ireland. So it's such an interesting roundabout legacy of how these things are kind of developing. I mean, maybe it's, you know, it's inevitable because the history of migration is the history of humanity. Like people have always moved from place to place, whether by force or by choice. But I just think it's really interesting that, you know, there's this kind of full circle idea happening here as well.
Has there been anything you uncovered that was contradictory to any verbal information your family told you about it?
Well, not really. I think like the you know, I haven't actually heard that much from my family about this, you know, because like how this kind of happened in the first place is actually by coincidence. Even though I'm related to Charlotte O'Brien from my mum's side of the family, my dad is actually from Cove. And so on Father's Day last year, we went and he pointed out there's a plaque about Charlotte Grace O'Brien in the town. And he was like, oh, that's your relative. Yeah, like with the sort of O'Brien history, like it's not something that I would necessarily have been told about, you know, it's just more that every now and then it might be like, oh, you're related to that person, or oh, you're related to that person. But that's, you know, I wouldn't have been getting too much details, you know. And in like, you know, and as I said, like, because if you have one great grandfather, you have 63 others. I don't want to put, again, too much weight on this family connection either. It's kind of a coincidence, but it doesn't like mean very much, you know. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about your process.
Yeah.
This is really interesting because it's kind of like looking at your brain. And before you start a film, you always do this. And if there is a point where you're like, okay, enough with the research, now I'm gonna write a script, or like, how does it transition to the creative, like?
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, this is very unusual, like for me in terms of how I work. When I was making the Prawn film or the Beatles film that I didn't get to show you, those were very much just a product of my brain. It's like sit down, write it, bang it out, it's all done. This, because I'm kind of dealing with historical material and because I don't know very much, it's been kind of a figuring it out as I go along kind of process. I think definitely using this structure of the Miro board makes loads of sense because it's allowing me to kind of see the connected lines between the different aspects. In terms of how I turn this into a film, I have no idea. I mean, this residency was really just, I think in my mind, like a gathering information stage. And this is, you know, like 3 weeks of sort of intensively trying to collect things. But when it comes to actually writing things, it'll be a case of trying to figure out what are the main points and what are the details. Because there's a lot of details that could be main points that aren't, you know, at the moment. So yeah, that's, thank you. That's a great question because I will eventually have to start asking.
One question from the live stream. Elinor, you mentioned making a film. Are you trying to convey the documentary aspects of the main character's story or more using it as a backdrop?
Yeah, that's a good question as well. Like just from, I just know that it's not going to be a documentary. I just don't, and I think the fun thing about being an artist is that you kind of don't have to be faithful to the subject that much. I also kind of think maybe, you know, you asked about the family connection, maybe the one sort of privileged aspect of being a relative of this person is that maybe I get to play with the truth a little bit in a way and sort of take liberties that maybe someone who didn't have any connection would be able to, possibly, I don't know. But yeah, I don't see this as being documentarian, but I think it's interesting what is the truth and what isn't the truth and how those kind of things would be formalized. If you're making a documentary, you have to kind of subscribe to certain ethics of how you treat your subject, and maybe I'm less interested in following those ethics, I guess. I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah.
Any more questions from in-person audience or online audience?
Do you usually share your projects mid-process with so many people, or
like never, never before. So this is really interesting, and it's been really interesting to have loads of conversations and to have like curator visits at the residency this month, because actually people have been asking me questions that I don't have the answers to, but then it prompts me to go out and try and find out the answers, and then that way I've been able to kind of uncover other stuff as well. But yeah, this is very unusual. It feels very vulnerable. But like I said at the start, this is very much rooted in uncertainty. And I like that because that fits with my practice anyway. So it's a bit vulnerable, but I can get over it, basically. Okay, thank you. Thanks. Okay, thank you.